Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Nayan Mehta. I'm the head of customer success here at Replicant, and I'm joined today by Peter, who is the CEO and co-founder of Operative Intelligence. Today, we're going to go through on how to unpack your contact center data. We have a lot of great insights and learnings and tips to share with you. Before we get into that, I have a few housekeeping items. We are recording today's session, and we'll share it up on a follow-up email after the webinar. We'd also like to keep this dynamic and as valuable as possible. So please ask questions using the chat function or the Q&A function throughout the panel. We'll be cataloging them and making sure we cover as many as we can at the end. With that, I'm going to kick things off by handing it off to Peter. So please introduce yourself and we will start the presentation.
Thank you, Nayan. Hello, everyone. My name is Peter. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Operative Intelligence, or OI for short. I'm an operational practitioner. I've spent my career building, managing, and transforming contact centers and operations for organizations globally. So like many of you on the call, I've experienced firsthand the challenge and the pain that comes with managing and improving these types of businesses at the same time. My co-founder and I launched OI to address the biggest challenge that we saw that the industry was facing, which is that still today, contact centers struggle to understand their customer demand. For an industry that spends hundreds of billions of dollars every year serving customers, we know more about metrics like average handle time versus why customers are contacting us in the first place. And what we've seen and demonstrated is that by understanding your customer demand, organizations can reduce their total inbound volume by over 50% by addressing contacts that can be automated or avoided by getting to the root cause of contact. We ultimately built a product we wished we had as operational leaders, which automates the analysis needed to get to this level of insight and take action. So very excited to share more about this with you today, as well as actionable ways that you can unpack your contact center data to identify hidden opportunities. And so with that, I will jump over to the presentation. Okay. So in terms of what we'll go through today, we will talk about the challenge that we face as an industry and as operational leaders in making sense of our contact center data. We'll demonstrate the power of unpacking your contact center data and the types of insights that this surfaces on how to improve your CX and operational performance with plenty of examples. We'll do a focused deep dive on the characteristics of inquiries which can be automated and how to find them within your contact center data. And lastly, we'll walk you through an action plan and a step-by-step approach that you can take back and use with your own teams to start identifying automation opportunities within your contact center data. So let's get started. The challenge. Quite simply, the challenge is that making sense of your contact center data and identifying actionable insights is really, really tough. As contact center leaders, operational leaders, we're so busy managing the day-to-day, new projects, in-flight initiatives, budgets, hiring, stakeholder management updates, the list goes on. It's really, really challenging to find both the time and the resources to dedicate to the problem. Some of the most common challenges that we've experienced as operators, as well as in the work we do with our customers, we wanted to talk through today. So starting at the top, one of the biggest challenges for the contact center is, what are we trying to improve? Are we trying to decrease AHT, or the number of contacts we receive each month? Potentially you're looking to increase first contact resolution or some type of customer measure like CSAT or NPS. Potentially you're looking to mitigate volume over a peak period, and that is really important, or drive revenue on a particular product line. It's really, really important to have a really clear set of goals that not only enables the contact center, but aligns with and enables the broader organization. And so with that, we want to pass to our first poll, and we're very curious and excited to understand what you would like to improve within your contact center.
There should be a poll that popped up on your screen for everyone if this is your first time. You can choose as many of those as make sense for you. give everyone here 30 more seconds to fill it out, and we'll look at the results. Awesome.
So we've got some results.
All of the above, the clear winner. But it's great to see a lot of people here are choosing kind of the customer experience, right? CSAT, NPS, how your customers actually feel about their experience with you.
Yeah, and this definitely aligns with what we've been seeing. I mean, typically there's kind of the big bucket of customer, and then the kind of the secondary bucket around operational flexibility and cost. But really important from a data and insights perspective, because knowing what you're trying to improve informs where you need to focus within the data and what type of insights you need to take action on. So in follow-up to that, one of the most common challenges and sticking points is, well, what data do we need to analyze? I'm still learning and seeing new reports in the contact center, and I thought I'd seen most of them. I think between ACD data from your telephony system, voice of the customer insights, whether it's CSAT or NPS, agent analytics, people insights, there's kind of a never-ending source of contact center data. It's like we're swimming in this ocean of data, but knowing what to analyze and how that enables you to achieve your goals can be a real sticking point and often cause analysis paralysis for contact centers in identifying, well, what is the right data for us to go after? And we're going to talk more about this in just a moment. In follow-on from that, what is the quality of the data? Does everyone trust it? This is always a big question that comes up. I think the really key thing here is that one of the most important pieces to get right in driving insight to action is having data that everyone trusts and believes in, and not just within the contact center. I would almost argue that within the broader organization is equally or potentially more important. And look, one of the most common instances that we run into is most contact centers are still using some type of legacy tool, such as call dispositioning. We've spent years analyzing call disposition codes. With this is where the agent is making a selection from a taxonomy after the call. What we've found is that even if two agents are consistently selecting the wrong code, so the top one or the bottom one, which inevitably happens when you're taking a lot of calls every single day, that skews the data set. And so call disposition data is really good for understanding trends at a high level, but in terms of precision and using that to inform insights, that's not the quality of data that you want to be using to drive decisions over time. And then lastly, how abstracted is the data from the customer? So the further the insight moves from the customer, the more diluted the insight and the more diluted the story. And so let me give you a simple example here. Let's say you want to start an initiative internally to analyze data from notes within the CRM. And you want to obtain insights around, why are customers contacting, or what are some common pain points. So if you think about that as a sequence, the customer is contacted through a channel, let's call it voice channel. They've met an agent. The agent has serviced that inquiry. After that inquiry has been completed, the agent, typically within their very limited amount of after-call work, provides an interpretation of why they think the customer contacted, and how they help them manage that inquiry. So that's going into a note within the CRM, free-form text, typically, potentially they're copy and pasting notes. A project team is then extracting that data from the CRM. So kind of a bulk extract of notes. And then an additional lens of organizational interpretation is put on those notes to understand, well, where are the insights? And that ultimately outputs into a set of insights and recommendations. And so when you look at that as a series, by the time the insights are delivered, there's been kind of two big washes of interpretation from the organization, and you're two big steps removed from what the customer was originally asking you to do. And so another really common challenge around, the closer you can make the insights to the customer, the more powerful the story and greater your ability to drive change systematically. So there are kind of a high level overview of challenges that we experience. So with all of these challenges, what does a path forward look like? What we've found is that the secret lies in understanding the work that you do for customers or your customer demand. And so what's really important here is unearthing not only what a customer is contacting about, but why. And so let me give you a really simple example. If you know that 12% of your inbound volume is related to inquiries for payments. So that is the what. You know that 12% of your calls are about payments. Now, if we expand on that and applying the lens of understanding the why, you might understand something like the following. About a third of those payments are because people went online, tried to make a payment and failed and had to come into the contact center to have their payment inquiry resolved. So that's a non-value add interaction and it's a failure into another channel. The second biggest driver of the payment inquiries is that people are calling to make a first-time payment on their membership. So there was a failure in the onboarding process where the rep didn't capture a payment, which meant that the customer couldn't take advantage of their product or service. So there's an upstream challenge that could be addressed. And let's say that the balance of the inquiries about why they're contacting are just plain vanilla payments. They don't know there's any other way to make a payment, so they're calling into the contact center. And so that represents a phenomenal opportunity to educate those customers and migrate them to self-service. So the why provides the context and these levers around what can you do as an organization to change the profile of that demand. Because you don't get this level of insight from your existing systems, we used to go through a process whereby we would get a group of SMEs in a room. We would put thousands of post-it notes on the wall in a conference room, and every post-it note would have the verbatim from a customer inquiry. So what the customer was asking for, would plaster them all over the walls, and then would spend a week workshopping manually. What are the inquiries? What are the sub-inquiries? And then for each of those, running the 5 whys exercise to understand, well, why did that contact happen in the first place? And the output of that exercise was that we were able to communicate in the words of our own customers what it is they were contacting about and why, what was the cost and effort, and use that to make systematically improved decisions as a contact center and as an organization. So our test for how well you understand your demand is quite a simple one, but quite complex to execute on. So the test for how well you understand your demand is on a single page, could you write down all of the reasons that your customers contact you in their own words? That's step 1. Step 2 is, for each of those interactions, could you note down what the handle time, the workload, and the cost is for each of those interactions? And then lastly, if you took just your top inquiry type, could you confidently say who your best reps are for that inquiry and what are they doing differently to deliver better call outcomes for your customers on that call type? With that, I think we have a second poll, Nyan, for the group.
Yeah, so this one is, based on what we've talked about, how confident are you in why your customers contact you today? We'll give everyone a minute here to answer, and we'll look at the results. And I think while people are filling this out, I'll give an example of a story that we saw just recently with one of our large insurance customers. We had signed up to do automation for really a very specific workflow that they were confident through their filtering and their disposition codes was all people are going to ask about in this specific calls that come to replicant to our automation are going to be about account management. And as we started taking the calls and actually literally transcribing what customers are saying and understanding their true intents, we realized that 50% of the calls we were getting, even through this heavily filtered line, were not about account management. They're about completely other things. And we were able to rapidly learn that within 2 weeks, learn it within another 2 weeks, actually implement new intents to capture and handle those people correctly, whether it was through automation or just sending them to the best agents for their inquiries. So I think great to see the results here. So most people are just somewhat confident, and I think that kind of tracks, right? We have a sense of why people call us. but without knowing what all your customers are actually saying, it's hard to really truly be confident.
Definitely. So we believed and saw the power of this process, and ultimately built a solution that uses AI to do all the heavy lifting on the classifications and the root cause analysis. So what we'd like to do is show you the power of unpacking your contact center data with some examples. So with that, I'm just going to switch over here. What we want to do is start by demonstrating what a excellent understanding of demand looks like. So this is an example for a financial services institution. It's a bank. Typically what we've done at this stage is we have ingested tens of thousands of rows of transcripts, which has all of those customer inquiries built into the transcription. This is for a voice channel for context. And what happens is that gets fed through the machine, and the machine is trained to identify why is the customer contacting and what are they contacting about. And so this is the crystallized output. So I want to walk you through this. Just to orient you, the colors are the handle time. So as we're kind of going up here, red, orange and red, red is over 600 seconds. So they're the longest calls. What we see on screen here, these classifications are why the customer has contacted. So the root cause, the biggest root cause reason for contact for this bank is because the customers have an issue with something. That is unique to customers needing some information on something. That's the driver. I need information on. And then the third largest one is they want to transact or change something on their account. That's the reason why they've contacted, right? So that's the customer intent. And so let's have a look at issues, because this is really interesting. What we can see at this level is that this is 189,000 calls a year, handle time 638 seconds. So not only is this the biggest in terms of volume, they're the longest, most complex inquiries. And so what you would want to understand is, well, what are all of the issues that our customers are contacting us about within this bucket of root cause? And this is where the context is really important. And so this breaks down all of the interactions that make up this bucket of root cause, and it's meant to be read intuitively, left to right. So a customer would say, I've got an issue accessing statements. I've got an issue because I've been charged incorrectly. I've got an issue because there's an error on my membership. That is what they are saying when they're contacting, actually calling into this contact center. So what is the biggest issue that this bank's customers are contacting about? Disproportionately high, should I add? Logging into their internet banking app. So they're having a trouble with this online functionality, which is driving a significant amount of volume into the contact center. One thing that I wanted to call out here is that all of this is in the words of the customer, right? And this is kind of built out of natural language processing. So you should be able to give this to anyone in the organization, even someone on the street, and they would know, okay, this is what this organization's customers are asking them to do. And that's a kind of a challenge that we work through for a long time with the dispositioning, because it's an organizational interpretation. You know, we use words like, that's a membership update, that's a retention call. That's actually not the language that customers use. And so aligning on what it is your customers are contacting about in their own words is really, really powerful, because it creates this objective view into what is driving your demand. And so even at this level, if you wanted to understand, well, what are all of the issues logging into the internet banking app, something that a web team or a product team is going to ask you immediately, you can drill down and say, okay, well, our biggest issue is people are having a problem unlocking their online account, followed by two-factor authentication. And what underpins all of this is the customer verbatims that have been classified into this sub-inquiry. So ultimately, you can hand this off to product teams, and they can have really focused solutioning around how do we resolve these customer pain points. What we've seen in using this approach is that for certain organizations, there's over 2,000 inquiries in their demand set. And so if you think about that practically in the context of an operation where you're doing manual dispositioning, firstly, you would need to kind of create that taxonomy for the front line. But then to have a frontline agent reliably make a selection from a list of 2,000 inquiries, I mean, you're not going to get the accuracy and data that everybody believes in. And so this machine-driven approach gives you a high fidelity breakdown of your work in the words of your customers. Now, the really powerful thing is once you understand your work that you do for customers, you can use this to start identifying, well, where are there opportunities for us to improve performance? And we're just going to focus on one piece of that today. So we do a lot of work with executives and enablement teams. The biggest question that they want to understand is what are the levers that we can pull as an organization to improve performance within the contact center, and where do we need to focus our investment, and what is the ROI going to be? So getting answers to those questions with credible hard data. And so I'm going to talk you through what is happening here, and then we'll go to it in more detail around the automation opportunities in just a moment. But what the machine is doing for every one of those inbound inquiries, it's asking two human questions. Does it add value? Does the contact add value to the customer? And does it add value to the organization? And so we'll talk about the attributes of what the machine actually looks for in order to make that determination. But the outcome is that you get these four quadrants that output from the value score. So for example, if you want to understand like the pain points, so these are inquiries that add no value to customers and no value to the organization. So these are things that we recommend should be minimized and ultimately eliminated over time. So if I was to give you an example there, and we looked at this one earlier because it's just such a big one for this bank, logging in online. So they're spending $320,940.97 a year servicing these inquiries. And so that's based on the resource cost within their frontline teams just to manage the work, no on cost. So what this tells us here is it's non-value add to the customer because they're online. They were tried to complete a task. They failed and they had to move into another channel to have to complete it. So that is non-value add. From an organizational perspective, that online functionality isn't serving the purpose that it's meant to. And so having to double service that within a higher cost channel is non-value add. And so these are typically inquiries that you want to work with your Lean Six Sigma teams, organizational enablement teams to go, well, by understanding the root cause, and we looked at this earlier, what are all of those online failures? By addressing them, we can mitigate and drive down this volume over time. And so being able to do that systematically in a prioritized order is really, really powerful. But I just wanted to give you that one example to show you what that looks like. Where we want to focus is, well, where are all of the opportunities to drive automation? So what are the inquiries that can be completed through self-service? And so across everything that customers are asking you to do, let's look at the automation opportunities for this bank. And so here they are, they're prioritized and they're quantified. So in this instance, we're able to tell the bank you're spending $220,000 a year because people are calling to transfer money between accounts. Transactional inquiry, high volume, low effort, could be completed through the IVR online self-service functionality if it was available. Just kind of moving down the list here, 183K for routing and account numbers. This was an interesting case because the organization had this information on their website. Customers just weren't going to the website. They were calling in. And so there doesn't always have to be an automated solution for every one of these inquiries. Where that functionality or information is available, it's a great opportunity for the contact center to go, let's look at clever ways that we can start migrating this volume. Let's kind of meet it higher up in the chain. Potentially we incentivize frontline for certain inquiries where it's like, hey, we'll send you a document in your email so you always have your routing and account number. So this kind of helps you identify ways that you can migrate volume as well. But moving down the list, process a payment, another 100K. Account balance, customers wanting to check how much money do I have in my checking account, 94,000, change my address. This one always sticks with me. I remember earlier in my career, we were doing an internal project to essentially define our digital roadmap. The contact center was asked for input and we didn't have access to this level of insight. And so we asked the front line and we think, what do you think the opportunities are to drive more self-service within the contact center? And someone said, oh, I think we get a lot of change my address calls. And we're all a lot of head nodding, consensus, yep, I think that's a good one. And then we realized it's because there had been a lot of change my address calls in the last week, so I think the really important thing here is having an objective view across all of your demand really helps you identify what are the priorities and where do you need to focus to start to drive the biggest impact. And Nine, I'm sure you're looking at all of these interactions and thinking, we could do a great job to automate these. So I'll hand over for you to give a couple of examples that you've encountered.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are great examples of transactional call flows that, a lot of these, especially with banking, do require security and that level of authentication and PCI compliance that honestly, if you have the right automation, can do all of that without actually having your agents have to handle these tier 1 calls. I mean, across other industries, right, whether it's e-commerce and subscription services, we see a lot of change my address, update my shipping, update my delivery date, where's my order. And so, across industries, insurance, we talked about claims, policy questions, account management, all of those things are opportunities for automation. And I think what you really want to look at is, and we'll get into some of the metrics of what we'll look at in a second, but is what's transactional, right? What can we actually get people through with lower motion in most cases? Yeah,
definitely. Just in the interest of time, we'll start getting into more of that deep dive around what are those characteristics. I did just want to show, just to come back to a point that I made earlier, is around what does all of this roll up and look like, and what are we kind of experiencing across the board? We said earlier that organizations can reduce their total inbound volume by over 50% by targeting inquiries that could be automated or avoided. And we're kind of seeing this general shape consistently across verticals and globally as well. And so for this organization, their automation opportunity makes up 33% of their inbound demand. So about 845,000 in opportunity. You're never going to get that to zero. So that's not the goal, but you could make significant improvements. And so, I mean, think about reducing 25% of your volume. What would that do for your business? So the two biggest levers are automation and then addressing what we call failure demand pain points. So things they're driven from errors either from in the contact center or from other parts of the organization, like not being able to log in online. For this bank, it's 42%, so over $1 million in opportunity. And so just kind of abstracting the thinking up to this level really kind of helps you think differently about the contact center, and really the power of changing your demand before it even reaches an agent is a kind of a transformational process in changing the way that you interact with and service customers. And I mean, with 43% of your demand driving pain, you want to start addressing some of those problems for your customers. This helps you know where to focus. But with that, let's do a deep dive on the attributes of inquiries that can be automated. And so let's start kind of moving towards how do you make this actionable within your own contact center. So what we know about inquiries which can be automated. So Nyan touched on this, they're transactional. And so what does transactional mean? Like what do you look for? I think we all intuitively get what transactional means. So at a high level, the way that we structure this is there's two buckets. One is what the data tells us. So if you were to look at your data set, if you're able to break down all of your inquiries and you knew the handle time and the resolution rates, transactional inquiries have higher resolution rates. That probably intuitively makes sense. 1.6x the contact center average. That's from a recent example that we pulled in for this presentation. Lower handle times. So 29% lower AHT versus other tier 1 inquiries. That's from another recent case study. If you want to get really sophisticated, you can look at the relationship between volume and workload. So if you can graph that at the inquiry level, where volume is disproportionately higher than workload, it means that they're high volume, quick transactions. And so that's also another really, really good signal that we've built into our product. So that's what the data signals for transactional inquiries. The most important piece is the language used by the customer. And so this is why it's so important to retain that fidelity around what are your customers saying. They're using language like change my address, send me a new card, update my payment information, confirm my account, process a payment. It's transactional in nature. And when you're looking at this across hundreds of thousands of classifications, it's kind of crazy how well it lines up, even across different industries. Customers are using the same language for transactional inquiries. And ultimately, it's between 19 to over 50% of a contact center's inbound volume. So the bank we looked at before was a little bit less than that. The lowest that we've seen is 19%, where there was a disproportionately high number of pain points for that organization, where they had very legacy products. But typically we're looking in the range of over 30 to 50%. So a really significant opportunity. And so understanding these attributes, we wanted to set up an action plan for you to be able to go back and say, well, how do we kind of make sense of this within our own contact center data? Sorry, Nan.
Before we move on, there's one more actually area I think we want to look when you're thinking about what can be automated. That these are the attributes of the call types itself, but you also have to look at your own systems and see where you have the right APIs and information available to automate. And I think that's a really important thing to get a handle on early is, does your CRM support things as simple as looking up your customer by their phone number, or things as complex as actually, changing some of their information, interacting with your order management system to, change an order or make a return, or to actually transact, like move money. So I think that's just one more area you want to make sure you have that team involved early on when you're trying to make these decisions. Definitely,
yeah, it's a great point, Ian. So how do you put this into practice? So if you didn't want to use an automated approach to classify your demand, so before we launched the company, this is what we would generally advise when we're asked to how do we make sense of our contact center data. So let me step you through it. The output that we're aiming for here is, what do we believe the automation opportunities, how big are they within our customer demand, and what are those inquiries? So what we would recommend is to analyze a stratified sample of calls. So that sounds really complex. It's not. I'll explain it. So what you would want to do is pick your most normal month, right? So not a peak period, where you're going to be able to get, what does your baseline customer demand look like? What customers are asking you to do? And it's stratified means that you want to take an even sample of calls for each day throughout that month. So you're not just kind of skewing it all to 1 week. If you're worried about sample size, it depends on the size of the business. If you're less than 1,500 seats, 500 calls is going to give you a good confidence in your demand. What we find actually is by the time you do 100 calls, the big classifications start forming up. The more calls you do, the longer the tail gets, but the big kind of opportunities don't change too much. And so you want to pick those calls. And then for each call, you want to capture at a minimum the verbatim inquiry and the handle time. And so what I'm talking about here is a spreadsheet where it's the call identifier, the verbatim that the customer used, what they said they were contacting about in their own words, and what's the handle time. Ideally, if you've got resolution, you want to include that as well. And so you want to capture all of that for your sample. And so you're going to be really, really close to what your customers are saying. In terms of how you can do that, if you've got transcription, you would do an extract and use that as your model. Alternatively, have 1 to 2 SMEs listen to a sample of calls and transcribe the verbatim. It's a couple of days of effort in most instances, and a phenomenal amount of insight that you get on the back end. So once you have that structured, you want to start doing a few passes. So the first pass is to think about these attributes that we discussed, the language used and the data that's associated with the call. And so for this first pass, you want to have an SME go through and flag all of the inquiries that have automation attributes. Don't think about it too much. Don't sit there for each single one and go, oh, no, I don't know. Just get through everything. Because once you go through and you see the language that's being used, you're going to see themes, things are going to be common, and you're going to get the hang of it. So just get through it as a first cut. Out of that, you're going to be able to see, well, we think about 40% of our inquiries have these automation attributes. Interesting. Then you want to go back and do a second pass when you're familiar with the data. So go through all of the classifications again. You want to optimize the classifications and designate sub-classifications. So you might say, oh, well, I classified this one this way, but really they're part of the same group of payments. And so if payments is a group, and then there's some clear sub-inquiries within that, like auto loan payments, insurance payment, create those classifications. Wherever there's like groups, you want to capture that information. And you're just doing this in a spreadsheet. You don't really need fancy tools. So do your second pass and kind of clean up the classifications. And at this point, you're going to be really familiar with the data. So your third pass, go through and formalize the classification. So if you've labeled things 3 different ways and it's essentially the same opportunity, just create a global label. This doesn't need to be 100% perfect. I'm going to talk about this in just a moment. But once you've got the classifications, quantify the opportunity. So what is the percentage of all of the classifications, the sub-classifications, and then apply that to your annualized volume. And so out of this exercise, which would probably take a few days, a week to execute properly, while you haven't analysed it at scale and you're not going to have every single inquiry, and you're not going to have the precision on the handle time and the costs, it's going to give you some directionally good insight around where to focus. The really important thing is, and it's the most important piece of advice, is that it's not about perfection. It's all about progress. You just need to keep moving. It's really easy to spend weeks, months thinking, what is the right data source? What are our classifications? How do we kind of want to score this as an organization? The best thing you can do is just get in there and get familiar with the data. And it's going to allow you to identify some phenomenal opportunities that you can probably action very quickly as well. And I think, Nyan, you've had some recent similar experiences as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think as you said it, the important thing is to get started. So with this process, even, it's something that most of you can probably implement in your existing call center tools, right? So go through the passes, when you're in that third pass, formalize your new classifications, put them into your call center system and coach your agents to use them. And then go for another month and actually then start this process over, right? Look at the actual, now you'll have actual data with people marking the right codes, hopefully, and you'll be able to match that up with, did we get this right? Right. And those, so that action, that constant progress is really what it's about.